Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade.
We chronicled the distinct memories of our childhood in our book, While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s, which takes you on a notably historic journey through that often forgotten decade. We also want to hear about your experiences during the 1950s. We will feature guests whose special stories of that decade will bring to mind magical moments of reflection, some with tears, some with smiles, but above all, a good dose of laughter.
We would like you to chat with us as we bring to mind the sights and sounds so familiar to that time in history. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are so glad that you are here. And I'm going to bring Jackie back into the studio also. There you go. Even though we live in different locations, she lives in Washington and I live in Iowa. We have the distinct advantage used with our recording platform to have fun chats with anyone who lives in this world. And isn't that exciting, Jackie, that we can do that? We can reach out and help broaden not only our experiences of the 1950s, but so many experiences of our viewers. And for viewers, we're so grateful that you tune in and learn about that decade from each of our guests. Jackie, where can you take us from here?
Well, I'll take our viewers to the screen. Please peruse the screen, and you'll notice on the bottom of the screen a purple banner, and it has www.wildthewindmillwatch.com. That is, of course, our website. That is a place to go where you can find information about the authors, the book, the events that we are might be representing the book at. Also, the fun chat and the vendors where you may find the book. So that is where you'll see While the Women at wildthewindmillwatch.com. Notice the upper right-hand corner. You see our book, and it pictures a beautiful North Dakota sunset, which wraps around the book, and the book title, as well as the cover, really tells about the contents inside. Mm-hmm. Also, look at the book on the lower right-hand corner. You'll see a little white spot. That indicates the 2022 National Independent Press Award in regional nonfiction category as a distinguished favorite. Now, our Windmill book was published in April of 2021. This little award came in April of 2022, and who knows what's going to happen this next year in 2023. Well,
we know.
You know one thing. You want to say something about that now?
Sure. Yes. Okay. The events that are in our book, While the Windmill Watched, will be made and produced into a motion picture. Jackie, can you believe that?
Oh, can't believe that.
And the 1950s was such a unique decade in the United States of America, and especially for us on the Great Plains of North Dakota, because of all the phenomenal advancements that occurred for the better of mankind. And we were just elated when Mr. Daniel Belinsky with Canonical Productions in Bismarck, North Dakota, chose our story to be produced into a motion picture. So that they're working on it right now, and we'll see how that all comes about. We're excited. Yep.
And folks, this is modern history, may we say, because this happened during the 50s, not the 40s or the 30s or 1800s, but it's modern history. And I guess we're not antique yet, but we're right, because you have to be 100 to be antique. But anyway, it really tells about a bygone time in the United States. Mm-hmm. So let's get on with our guest. His name is Bob Wefald. He is a former North Dakota Attorney General, State District Court Judge, and a retired Navy captain. He was born in Excelsior, Minnesota, the youngest of the 4 children of Olav and Walma Wefald, whose fathers immigrated from Norway and whose mothers were born in America to Norwegian parents. And thus, Bob is proud to be 100% Norwegian. Bob lived for a few years in Garrettston, South Dakota, before his family moved in 1949 to Minot, North Dakota. He is a graduate of University of North Dakota, a 1964 graduate of the University of North Dakota, and a 1970 graduate of the University of Michigan Law School. He and Susan Benishop, and I probably wrecked that name, sorry, you'll have to correct me, were married in June 1969, and they moved to Bismarck in 1970 for Bob to take a job as a law clerk for North Dakota State Supreme Court. They have 3 children, 2 grandchildren. Their son was killed in a vehicle accident in Kings Canyon National Park in 2013. Susan retired from the Public Service Commission at the end of 2008 and has having served for 16 years and having won 3 statewide elections. Bob retired at the end of 2010 after 12 years as a state district court judge. Bob, we welcome you to the 1950s Fun Chat.
Yes. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you. So let's get going.
Okay.
You bet. Question number 1. We have completed 77 Fun Chats. Many of the guests have noted that there is one word that stands out as being the theme of the 1950s. That word is freedom. What
Amen.
does that word mean to you when you think of growing up in that decade?
In the 1950s, freedom was the byword for me because as kids, we could go anywhere and do anything. But when you got to the age you could have a bicycle, wow, you could go all over the place. We would go outside and play regularly because it wasn't TV to drive us into the house, no internet, no cell phones. The way your parents kept track of you, your mom would just step up on the front porch and say, "Bob, dinner."
That's right.
And that's when we came home. Then we would walk to school, in neighborhood school, always a lot of fun. When I went to junior high, I walked down there, and then in high school, I got a ride once in a while. We would play games outside. Even during school time, we would always go outside at night after supper, and we play games like kick the can, which is always a lot of fun. And we play out in the snow. We'd play some balls, pick up ball in the lot next door. We had a hill right behind us, which is North Hill in Minot. Now it's covered with houses, but at the time, open space, and we'd go up there and roam around. In fact, in the summertime, we would slide down the hill on pieces of cardboard, and that's how I spent my first night in the hospital because I hit a rock and broke my arm. And took me to the hospital and put a little splint on it. And today they just send you out the door, but then they kept me overnight in the hospital. And it was a great time. Just you could come and go as you wanted. And going down to the Roosevelt swimming pool, when you had a bike, we just pedaled down there. Every day we went down there in the summertime to the Roosevelt Park swimming pool, which was really a great pool. We loved it. We can get all over town. When I was living in Shirley Court, one of the many houses we lived in Minot, we'd walk south over the passenger bridge over the railroad tracks to get to downtown Minot. They let you go wherever you wanted. And in 1950, when I was 8 years old, my mom would give me a quarter, and I'd walk downtown from Northwest Minot. On a Saturday, we go to the movie theater, and we get into for 25 cents. We get into the movie theater with a box of popcorn. We watch a cereal. We watch the newsreel. We'd watch a cartoon, and we watch the Western typically.
Okay.
It was a lot of fun.
Okay. Were you a fan of Roy Rogers or Gene Autry?
No. My favorite hero was Tim Holt.
Tim Holt.
Yeah, he was a great cowboy, and he had a sidekick named Cheeto Jose Gonzalez Rafferty. You
are enlightening us.
Look it up. Tim Holt was a great cowboy. Yes, he was. He made lots and lots of movies.
Okay.
So in the evening, was there a curfew? in Minot?
If there was, no one told me.
Okay.
The only curve I had was, Bobby, come home. You know, that was
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Bob, you mentioned walking on over the railroad tracks to get to downtown Minot. Did you ever travel by train? Did your
Oh,
family?
yes.
Okay,
Yes,
can you tell us about that?
Yes, that was how we got around. In fact, when we came to Minot in the fall of 1949, my dad had been up there in the summer to getting things going. And we were living in Garretson, South Dakota. And so we were going to move up. My mom and my two brothers and my sister and I were going to take the train up to Minot.
Mm.
And I know that my dad had sent me a letter. I sent us a letter. And in the letter, he said, Bobby, there's no candy in Minot.
Sure.
So I went around and told everybody in Garretson there was no candy in Minot. So when we got on the train, there was this big box of candy. And we did the passenger train at that time, can you believe it, stopped in Garretson, a small town. I think we went to Wilmer and switched to the Great Northern, and we got to Minot on that train. So we took the train, and we stayed overnight in this hotel downtown, not a particularly glorious one, but that's when I first found out what a chamber pot was for.
Okay. Tell our viewers.
What a chamber pot for?
Yes.
Well, that's for people who don't have to go down the hall to go to the bathroom. You could just potty in the chamber pot.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And did the hotel take care of cleaning it up and emptying it?
Well, I'm assuming they did because we were only there one night and we left. Maybe the pot was full when we left. I don't know. I didn't empty it. I can tell you that.
Okay.
But I have emptied lots of things since then that look like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, what an interesting story too, to be in Minot. But did you ever go to the North Dakota State Fair at Minot when you were a
Sure,
child?
I did all the time, every year. It was a big event, and I learned only recently that it didn't become the state fair until sometime well after I was there. It was just a fair, and so we would go out there, and as a kid, a bunch of us would go out there and we'd ride our bikes out, and we'd go to all the rides.
Sure.
And work on all the rides, which was a lot of fun.
Yes.
One great adventure I had at the state fair was when I was, I think in the summer of 1957, maybe 1958. I got a job at the state fair working at the bingo stand. One of my friends had been there, and this was the traveling bingo stand that went with the show. And the guy's name was Jimmy, who ran the thing. Very, very nice man. I just admired him. And he taught me how to handle my money. We had this apron that we'd wear, and we'd have all the cards were, in fact, had corn on them. Then they put a little piece of corn on them. So I ran one side of the tent, and I had my money there. And he came up to me and he said, "No, give me the money." And he took it all out and he sorted it the way he wanted. He said, "Here's how you do it. You put the 20s first, then you put the 10s, then you put the 5s, and the bigger money, if you got that, beyond the 20s. And then you take all the ones and put it in the backside. Everything's facing the same direction, heads up, and you fold it in half and you put it in your pocket." He said, "That way you'll double your money." And that's the way I've done it ever since. I've always taken care of my money that way. I have my pocket just now the exact same way. And so I learned that lesson, and it was a good one. Now, the carney people I met, I thought they were pretty nice, and they were stuck together a lot. And this guy was really nice to me. And I think I have this illusion that I made big money because he paid me. We'd go out, we'd work like a 12-hour shift. We'd get there from noon to midnight or thereabouts, and he'd pay us in cash at the end of the day. And I'm thinking, I made $40-50 a day. I may be hallucinating, but that was I was rich. I thought making big money.
Yeah. Yes.
Did-
Go ahead.
Did the carnival person ever express concern on those bigger bills of having received counterfeit money?
Oh, it never was an issue. In fact, I actually thought about spending the rest of the summer traveling with him, and my dad was prepared to let me go. I wasn't certain, so I didn't do it. I can tell you definitely it was the summer of 1957, because that's the summer I would have been at Y Camp as my second year as a consular. But my dad, when I said, I want to go back to camp as a consular again this year, it would be my 6th year in a row at camp. He said, "I don't want any permanent Y campers in the family." So he made me stay home.
Uh-huh.
What did you do at Y Camp as a counselor?
Well, I was a counselor for 1 year. That was in 1956. And I had a cabin full of boys. I was 13 years old when I started, and 14. I turned 14 that summer. I had boys in my cabin who were older than me, but I had a red staff T-shirt, which, wow, I'm in the staff, so I must be really old. And if you looked at that one book I sent you, I'm in the front. That's my sheet. Y Camp staff T-shirt in front. So I had boys in my cabin. I ran all summer, and I ran the Woodsman program, which I would teach boys how to canoe, take them for hikes in the woods, teach them how to swim. It was just a great summer. And we played capture the flag at night. It was just terrific. Great summer.
That's cool.
Was that held up in Lake Metagoshi, or where was that held?
No, that was at Lake Cormorant, Minnesota, south of Lake Park, where and my dad was sort of happy that I went there because he grew up in Hawley, and Hawley's not that far from Lake Cormorant, so he was not at all reluctant. So when I went to Y Camp, it was the first time. It was in 1952 for 1 week, and my dad let me go, and I said, Dad, I'm supposed to have a knife and a flashlight pocket. He said, okay. So he gave me $5. I went up to the Army and Navy store at the north end of Main Street in Minot, and I bought a little sort of buddy flashlight so you could sit down, and I bought this fancy knife. And I walked into my dad's place and said, look, Dad, I got this nice lantern here, and look at this knife. You push this button and bam. He said, no, give me that. He took me and the switchblade back to the people and said, don't ever sell a kid this kind of a knife. So I got a decent little pocket knife. I thought a switchblade was really cool. You just push the button and there it was. No, that's not what I was supposed to have. So, yeah.
Well, he didn't give you any requirements to start with, did he? Your dad?
I bought a knife. That's true. I did. And I did a switchblade at that time on a lamp for under $5. Well, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
So
I have a question.
I went back the next 2 summers in 53 and 54 as a 2-week camper, learned how to swim there. 55, I go back as a 2-week camper early in the season, and I get a horrible sunburn. And we're playing capture the flag, and the camp director, Myron Wade, taps me in the back. You can see my skin peel open. So he took me to Detroit Lakes to get a shot the next day, and came back, and he said, how would you like to spend the rest of the summer at Y Camp as a dishwasher? A dishwasher just left, and we could use you as a dishwasher. I said, that'd be great. Well, let's call your dad. So you couldn't call from the camp. You had to drive into Lake Park where there was a phone. So I called my dad, and my dad said, yeah, he can spend the rest of the summer. So I spent the rest of the summer at Y Camp, and I loved it. Another guy, Harold Solomon, and I set the tables every day. We cleaned up the mess hall. We did the dishes, took care of the garbage 3 meals a day. And at the end of the day, at the end of each meal, we'd take the garbage and we put it on this pit, sort of a progressive pit. You put it on one side of the pit. We got out to the boathouse, and we gasoline and we'd put on it, and we'd light it, okay? It would burn, we'd watch it. And then, all right, so one day at lunch, we're doing this, and I'm standing with my shovel, and he's standing with his shovel, and the thing goes, boom!
Ooh-wee.
The garbage pit blows up. Now, fortunately, neither one of us were hurt, but I think we figured out what it had been. Someone had put empty can of Feld's naphtha in there.
No.
So when the pressure got, boom! Anyway, people came running, and I think the reason I got a job there is he didn't want to send me home with a sunburn on my back.
Okay.
Sure.
So the other exciting adventure at Y Camp that year was the 4th of July. At that time, the fireworks consisted basically of a rocket. You'd have a tray at a 45-degree angle. You had a big stick on it, then you light the fuse, and it would take off and explode in the air. So it was dark, and we were doing the campers way over there. We're back over here, and we're sort of walking around in the dark, and someone walks by and steps on a stick of one of the back of the rockets, so it broke off.
Oh.
The stick did. So I think, well, we should just shoot it off. So I put it in the tray, lit the fuse, and instead of going anywhere, it just sat there and spewed sparks and stuff. all the other skyrockets on the ground lit up, and so we got this huge thing went all over the place, every deck, and all the campers thought it was fantastic. Fortunately, no one got killed, no one got poisoned ivy from jumping in the weeds. But I've always been not a big fan of fireworks.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, you said you're not a big fan of fireworks, but I'm wondering if that gave you education enough that you could be the main fireworks attender in your adult life.
Oh, I could, but my kids, they took care of that. They love fireworks. My son in particular loved fireworks. So they didn't need any help and supervision. All they needed from me was money.
Of course.
Yeah.
So I have a question about Who's Fest. Was that going on when you were a child?
No, it wasn't. That's a relatively new creation, say 20, 25 years ago. And so it was never part of my childhood, although being Norwegian was part of that.
Yes.
And going to the Lutheran Church, First Lutheran Church in Minot. A couple of events I remember, we had the Reformation Sunday service at the Civic Center, where it wasn't ELC at that, it was Norwegian Lutheran, American Lutheran, whatever it was. All the churches got together and had one service. We did that for a couple of years when I was in high school. Now, fast forward to 2017, which is the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. I convinced the bishop of the ELC here in Bismarck to hold a similar event, and I raised the money for it. So we had 3,500 people in the Bismarck Civic Center for a Reformation 500th year anniversary Reformation service. So I've always been a big time Lutheran. It's been part of my thing, and that's where I met my wife in the Lutheran Student Center. So it's always been important to me.
Sure, good, okay. Lovely. So in your bio, you said that, first of all, I'd like to know, what is the Navy Science Cruiser Award, and what does it mean to have won this award?
That's a good question, because I had no clue what this was. This was the end of my junior year. I built a model of a nuclear reactor with a sign explaining it. And my physics professor came by that afternoon and said, "Oh, this looks like a Navy project." I said, "Oh, great. This is really good. I'm happy about that." So we had to go home for supper, and then the judges came and judged things. And we came back at 7:00, and they started announcing the winners. And one of the things they did is they announced Bob Wefald, first prize, nuclear reactor. I go up, and there's maybe a dozen of us up on the stage. And then they said, and there's another award we're passing out today, and that's the Navy Science Cruiser Award. Bob Wefald wins that.
Yeah. What does that mean, huh?
So I said, what does this mean? They said, we don't know, but the Navy contacted us and said that we could pick a guy to be a Navy Science Cruiser, and they'll tell you what to do. So they did tell me what to do. In the fall, they said, go down to the Air National Guard hangar in Fargo, and we'll send a Navy plane to pick you up. So I trained down to Fargo, got there early in the morning. I spent the night there, and they sent a C-46, a 4-engine plane, picked me up and 3 or 4 other guys, and they stopped along the way, took us down to San Diego, where we spent a week in the barracks there, and we had a great tour. We went on board the USS Redfish in port, which is what we call Navy, a fleet boat. It's an old diesel submarine. It was a submarine in the movie Run Silent, Run Deep with Clark Gable, if you're Clark Gable fan.
Yep.
One day they took us on a launch out to the USS Oriskany, which is an aircraft carrier, and they were waiting for us. So we all climbed on board, and they went out and did carrier qualifications with a Phantom airplane, which made a lot of noise. And then at the end of the day, they took us back close to the coast of San Diego, and they sent a launch out for us, a big boat. We had to go down this accommodation ladder. It was dark, couldn't see anything. So I was the first one down the accommodation ladder. So I'm getting down to the deck to get in. The launch drops about 10 feet, comes up about 10 feet because of the swells. So I'm running up and down the ladder. And so I finally figure out when it comes up, I'd run down and jump in. So everybody else did, and we got in just fine. I did go up to, they flew us up to Point Mugu. We saw a regular air-breathing missile fired. Yeah, it was just a great tour.
Well, no, and did that help you decide to enter the Navy?
No, I had no clue about I never thought once of joining the Navy. Joining the Navy was second place to joining the Army. And I say, I told you I couldn't get into the Army because I had too much acne. I flunked the draft physical. Very sad.
Oh my goodness.
Can you expound on that, Bob?
Sure. It was 1964, January, and I was in the 4-year honors program. I was going to be the first graduate. And they wanted you to go to graduate school. I didn't want to go to graduate school. I was sick of school. I didn't have any skills because I was a social science major. So I needed a job, and I thought, yeah. So I looked, the best job, I thought, well, I should get a commission. Let Uncle Sam take it. Now, Vietnam really hadn't started at this point. Okay? So I went down to the Army recruiter and talked my way into it. And he said, all right, I'll let you go to Fargo. So I went to Fargo and took the physical with a couple of busloads of guys who were being drafted. And at the end of the day, this big sergeant comes to me and says, Mr. Wefald. I said, yes. He said, you flunked. I said, flunked? I said, how the hell can you flunk a draft physical? He said, you have too much acne. I said, too much acne? I think what had happened is the doctor saw that I was a senior in college, and these other guys being drafted. He probably figured I'd blown my deferment, so he flunked me. All right, so my life plan is in shambles. I'm at the student union the next day, and there's a guy in a uniform with a table covered with brochures. I later learned he was lieutenant junior grade in the United States Navy. No one's talking to the poor guy. So I pick up a brochure and start flipping through it. He said, son, are you interested in the Navy? I said, sure, sounds great. And I can tell you the history of the Navy, I never once thought of joining the Navy.
Yeah.
So I said, taking a test, I can take it now. I went up to the ballroom, sat down, took this test with the kind where you mark it in, and they get the holes in the answer key. Oh, you look, and he said, this is the best test score. Wow, this is great. I said, okay. So I moved from picking up a brochure to joining the United States Navy. I'm filling out this form that's multiple pages long. I get about 2/3 of the way. He's right with me. Get about 2/3 of the way through, and I get to the question, have you ever been refused by the armed forces? I said, well, yesterday I flunked it. Oh, God, don't. Just sign. I'll take care of this.
Yeah.
So I signed. And a couple of weeks later, I get a letter from somebody in the Navy. Said, not so fast. You can't get in the Army. We need pictures of your neck, your chest, your back, face to see how bad this acne is, and you have to get a doctor to sign off on this form they sent me. So I had my roommate take the pictures. I got in my 57 Chevy 4-door sedan. I drove down to the Grand Forks Clinic, and being a sophisticated college senior, I didn't check in. I didn't make an appointment. I just started walking down the hall. A man with white hair and a white coat says, can I help you? I said, I need to see a doctor. Well, he said, what's the problem? He said, well, I've got to have a doctor check this acne out so I can get in the Navy. He said, well, I'm a doctor. He said, step in this room here. He said, take off your shirt. So I took off my shirt. He looked at me and he said, I can see in the Army where the foxholes and all that dirt could be a problem, but in the Navy, this is not a problem. He signs, and 27 years later, I get out.
Wow, cool. Thank you.
Great. And you were a captain. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. I stayed in and they kept promoting me. I guess it's rewarding you for patience or whatever. I had a great time in the Navy. I loved it.
Oh, good. Where were you stationed?
What's that?
Where were you stationed?
San Diego. I was on a guided missile destroyer for 29 months. I was the only reserve line officer when I got on board. It was a brand new ship. Everybody else was going to be chief of naval operations. I was going to go home in 3 years. And when we went to Westpac in 1966, the captain chose me to be the gunnery officer in charge of the ship's 5-inch guns, where we're going to war for the first time. So I got to shoot at the bad guys. They didn't shoot at us. It was perfect timing. I love the Navy. It was absolutely the great joy of my young life. It's just fantastic experience.
Okay.
And you had some experience over in close to Vietnam. Is that correct?
We were off the coast called Westpac. We were off the coast of Vietnam. We went to the Gulf of Siam side down the bottom of Vietnam. We did some shore bombardment there, and then we did some shore bombardment again. But we mainly spent our time trailing the aircraft carriers to pick up anybody and no one fell overboard, fortunately. But we did pick up a couple pilots that had been jumped out of airplanes that had crashed and things like that. And then we spent 33 days up in the middle of the Gulf of Tonkin all by ourselves, watching the American planes going in and out of North Vietnam, making sure there's no bad guys coming with them. So for me, it was a great adventure in my long life. I just loved it. It's just a lot of fun. And I drove the ship every day, two watches every day. So I drove the ship 8 hours a day. I mean, I was the junior officer of the deck. and I would be the conning officer. I'd drive the ship where it's supposed to go. It was a lot of fun.
Do you still stay in touch with any of those Navy buddies?
Yes, I do. I'm sort of the linchpin to get in touch with people. I just talked to Brian Seibold yesterday. He's the guy that replaced me as gunnery assistant. I've talked to Andy Fay. He was the junior officer below me when he came on board. He was my George. I was the bull ensign when he came on board. And yeah, I stay in touch with at least a dozen, maybe 2 dozen people.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So you have mentioned anything else, Janine, on that topic before I go on?
No, go ahead.
Okay. You've mentioned that for you, the 1960s and the 1950s ended in 1964. So please tell us why you think that's true.
Because I think my college at UND was really a continuation of the life I had in North Dakota. I knew a lot of kids there from Boy State. I knew some people from Girl State, and I have kids from Minot there. The only problem I had at UND is I didn't start till January of 1961. Because in 1960, I went out to Rensselaer Polytechnic to Troy, New York, to be a nuclear physicist. Well, I learned 2 things. I learned how to study, and I learned I wasn't going to be a nuclear physicist, and I quit before I got any grades. So I went back home and sort of hung my head because I'd flunked out, basically. And it was sort of embarrassing being back home because I was voted most likely to succeed in my class, and I had failed. That's just the way it was. But I got a job at Jay's Men's Store, my buddy's family. In fact, I'm going to see him in a few days down in Phoenix. He's been my buddy since the 4th grade. His family gave me a job at Jay's Men's Store selling clothes, and I did that, and went through Christmas, went through New Year's. My dad said, "What are you going to do?" Well, I said, "We've already had this stuff." So I remember I said, "I'm going to school in California next fall." Yeah, he said, "You can go anywhere you want, but what are you going to do right now?" Well, I said, "I got a job selling clothes." No, I said, you're hanging around the house. Well, you got to go to school. I said, "Well, I'll go to Minot State then." No, he said, "That's like hanging around the house." Well, I said, "What am I supposed to do?" He said, "Get on the train, go down to the university and enroll." I did that. Came there as a failure. People knew I'd failed. I knew the dean of men. I knew the dean of students, and knew a lot of people. But by that spring, by the end of that first semester, I looked around and said, "God, I love this place. It was just so great. I loved it." I should have gone right off the bat, but I had a great time at UND. It was a great school for me. Gave me a good education. So I think for me, it was just sort of a continuation of North Dakota being minded. The Navy, the break after 1964 was entirely different. I went to war for the first time, got a whole bunch of different experiences. I actually served with people who were of color. I only knew one black person when I was in Minot, Bob Pope, the youth secretary of YMCA. I still know him. I stay in touch with him all the time. He's 93. He's asked me to come to his funeral eulogy. I said, "I'd be happy to do that, Bob. You can come to mine." He's a great guy. I had him come up to Groton, Connecticut, and give the invocation for the chairman's dinner for the commission of the USS North Dakota. He's great. He is my black contact. Now, I found out after I got in the Navy and went home. I was back in Minot for my 10th year reunion, and this guy was a friend of mine sitting next to me. His name Tracy Randall was in my class. I knew he went in the Navy. I said, "Tracy, how did you like the Navy?" Well, he was on an aircraft carrier. I said, "Well, how was it?" He said, "They put me with all the black guys." I looked at him, I said, "God, he's black." I didn't know that. I mean, I'd never paid any attention to that. We never thought about
Sure.
I never thought about him being different than the rest of us. But there he was. And when I went back and looked at his wrestling picture, he looked like the black people I'd seen in the Navy. So 1964 was a real break for me from lily white North Dakota to the rest of the world.
Sure. Sure.
That's right.
Bob, you talked about a 1957 Chevy. I love talking about cars. Tell us about that car of the 50s.
Okay. Well, it turns out that my dad had a lot of cars, and he bought, when I was in my junior in high school, he bought a Imperial baby blue Imperial with the big fins on it, push button drive, and
Did
he
it have
he hated it. Yeah.
the wheel, the spare tire?
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
back.
the back.
Just really a beautiful car, but he hated it because he liked to wear his hat, and the head was too low. So my brother John was at a Pacific Lutheran College, and he came home for the summer. This was 1961, and I needed a car. He needed a new car, so we said to my dad, I said, let's sell your Imperial and get cars for John and me. Okay, he said, you can do that. So my brother got a nice, like a 60 Chevy or something, a nice one. And I picked up this 57 Chevy 4-door sedan, and I loved it. So the rest of the story is that fall, my brother went out to the University of Michigan to start his PhD program. So we drove his car. We drove it all the way out to Michigan, and the plan was for me to take the train back to Minneapolis, which I did. And then my job when I got to Minneapolis was to get off the train, go to the Checker car dealer in downtown Minneapolis, and wait for them to open. So I was there as they opened. And my job was to look at the 2 Checker sedans that were in the showroom. So I looked at them. I called my dad. I said, there's one that's sort of greenish colored, and there's one that's sort of blue. And he said, okay, buy the blue one. So I handed the phone to the guy, and my dad wired the money down, and the guy handed me the keys and the title, and I drove it back to Minot. So my dad we had this Checker cab, and my dad loved it because he had plenty of room for his hat. He could get in and out of the car.
Sure.
And it was a unique car to drive around Minot because it was basically the civilian version of the old Checker cab. So I love it because I got a car, and my brother got it, and my dad got himself a car to do. So it worked out great. We all loved it, and my dad did everything.
Your dad seems like he was very accommodating, very understanding of you and your brother, because I don't know, you were very fortunate to have a father like that. Sounds like. Well,
he was a strong Norwegian, hardworking guy. He'd gone to a couple years of college. His parents. His dad was elected Congress for 2 terms out of Hawley, Minnesota. So on one term, instead of taking him to Washington, D.C., his senior year in Hawley, they sent him to Concordia Academy. And then he went to Concordia College, and he said, I hated it. He said, the only thing I learned how to do at Concordia was to smoke cigarettes and play pool. And he was always a good pool player, and he quit cigarettes a long time ago. So he was a hardworking guy. And when we moved to Minot, we were basically broke, but he made some breaks in his business and made money. And after that, he paid for everything for us. We were really blessed children. He paid for our education, although my brother Knut got a scholarship. It's silly. There are other expenses. My dad paid for everything. And he bought us cars.
Nice.
It was just great. It was, and he was the enforcer. He wasn't particularly wild about going to church, but my mother was very devoted. And so my dad basically said, look, you do what your mother says. So I would go to Wednesday night. So we'd have confirmation and choir practice, or we have choir practice. Of course, Wednesday night now, everybody plays all this kind of stuff. The church gets none of this stuff anymore. Saturday morning, we go to church, First Lutheran Church in Minot. We go to confirmation. We had to do it for 3 years. And then we'd take a break for 15 minutes or so. And then we'd have choir practice. And right across the street, there were 2 facilities are gone. One was called Mulroney's Grocery, which is a nice little mom grocery store. And right next to it was the Beaver Palace, which was a restaurant. And we go over there in between the break and get a cup of hot chocolate and either a caramel roll or a sweet roll. They were absolutely delicious. And Mulroney's Grocery, the woman's name was Gertie Mulroney. And she loved having us come around, but she would sort of kid with us all the time. And she had this handyman guy who was, probably a little slow. And he would chase us around the center of the store, and she'd laugh and we'd laugh. It was a lot of fun. I had a great time in confirmation choir. And when I was our senior year, We didn't have to go to confirmation word, but everybody at that time went to Sunday school. They really did.
Sure.
And I suppose we had a full house for Sunday school all the time. Yeah.
Well, Bob, we're nearing the end of our fun chat. This has gone so quickly, and there's so much more I'd like to ask you. But I do like to ask 2 questions of our guests.
Sure.
And one of them is, can you key in on a fun memory of the 1950s?
Oh, for me, the fun memory of the 1950s was Y Camp. I had just such a great time in Independence. It was just great. It was a great experience.
Good. And then the other one is, what was it from the 1950s that has stayed with you and been so influential in your adult life?
It starts in 1959 when I sort of got successful in political stuff. I had a great year in 59. I was elected president of student council. I won the science fair. I was elected governor of Boys, and I went to Boys Nation, went to the National Students Council Leadership Conference, and I liked it. I thought it was great. And so I would tell you that got me interested in politics. And when I was at the university, and knowing I wasn't going to be a nuclear physicist, and figuring out what I was going to do, figuring out going to law school, I said, I want to go to politics. So that was it. So when I came back to North Dakota to be a law clerk at the Supreme Court, my goal was to get in politics and get success at it. And I was. I got elected Attorney General, and that was the high water mark of my political career, because in 1984 I was unelected. And I didn't get reelected. Big blow. But I did go on to become a state district court judge. So I've always been interested in politics, and that started for me as a result of my having the success in the student council and things like that in high school.
Sure. We build upon our lives, each and every experience of our life, and you certainly have, and found your niche.
Yes.
After all.
It doesn't sound as if you were a failure at all. You just had a little medical condition.
Yeah. Well, failure is if you let it drag you down. Success is getting back up and going forward. And so I have always had a positive outlook in life. I've just loved life. It's been so great. I've even memorized my last words in case you should have it for your viewers right here in case they find my dead body somewhere. Here's what they are.
We hope
my last words are these. Thank you, Jesus. It's been a great life.
Amen. I like that, Bob.
That's a good way to end. Thank you for being our guest.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking me.
Oh, this has been so much fun, Bob. Thank you. And viewers, we're so glad you joined us for this 78th edition of the 1950s Fun Chat. And we'll bring more wonderful stories for you in the coming weeks as well. Right, Jackie?
Indeed. So viewers, before you leave, notice that little red button there? It's a subscribe button. Please touch that, as well as the blue thumbs up button. And tell your friends, even your family, about the 1950s Fun Chat. So until next time, toodaloo.